Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at some research that you all sent over, and it's all about cognitive biases and how they can secretly just drain our bank accounts.
Yeah.
It's crazy the stuff that I've been reading.
Yeah, it is fascinating how these biases that were essential for our ancestors, to survive
Right.
can really backfire in today's world, especially when it comes to money.
Totally. So we're working with these Stone Age brains in a world of, high frequency trading and online shopping.
Yeah,
No wonder we fall for those limited time offers every time.
right.
But to really grasp this, we need to understand that cognitive biases are like these mental shortcuts that our brains develop to make super quick decisions in situations where overthinking could be dangerous.
Yes. But the problem is these shortcuts aren't always accurate, especially when it comes to these complex financial decisions.
Right.
They cause us to react emotionally rather than logically, and that's where we get into trouble.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So let's break down a few of these sneaky biases, starting with anchoring. So what is anchoring and how does it mess with our spending?
So anchoring is this fascinating phenomenon where our brains latch on to the first piece of information we see and use it as a reference point for all subsequent
Yeah,
judgments.
okay.
Imagine you walk into a store and you see a jacket originally priced at $500, now marked down to $250.
Yeah.
That initial price of $500, that becomes your anchor.
Wow, so even though it's on sale, I might still be overpaying because that $500 price tag is stuck in my head.
Exactly. Retailers are masters at using anchoring to influence our perceptions of value.
Okay.
Think about those 50% off signs plastered everywhere.
Okay.
They make us feel like we're getting a steal. But what if that original price was intentionally inflated just to create that illusion?
Oh, so those were now pricing strategies are basically tricking our brains into thinking we're getting a better deal than we actually are.
Right.
It's like those going out of business sales that seem to last forever.
Exactly.
I always wondered about that. But I'm curious, are there any ways we can fight back against this anchoring effect? I mean, knowing about it is one thing, but how do we actually avoid falling for it, in the moment?
That's a great question. One of the most effective strategies is to set your own anchor by doing your research beforehand.
Okay.
So if you're thinking about buying that jacket, check out prices for similar jackets from different brands.
Yeah.
This gives you a more realistic benchmark and helps you avoid being swayed by those inflated original prices.
That's a really good point. So instead of just taking the retailer's word for it, we need to become informed consumers and do our own due diligence.
Exactly.
I guess that goes for pretty much any purchase, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Another helpful tool is Camel, a website that tracks price histories for products on Amazon.
Oh, I've heard of that.
You can see how the price has fluctuated over time and get a sense of whether a sale is truly a bargain or just a clever marketing tactic.
I'm definitely going to check that out. Knowledge is power, right? So we've talked about anchoring. What's the next bias we need to be aware of?
Let's talk about loss aversion. This is the tendency to feel the pain of a loss much more strongly than the pleasure of an equivalent gain.
Okay.
Studies show that the psychological impact of losing $100 is about twice as strong as the positive feeling of gaining $100.
Ouch. That makes sense. I know, I definitely feel the sting of a loss way more than the joy of a gain.
Right.
So how does this loss aversion play out in our financial lives?
Well, think about those times you've clung to a losing stock, hoping it would magically rebound.
Yeah.
It's painful to admit defeat and sell at a loss. Right.
Totally.
So we hold on, even when all signs point to further decline.
It's like throwing good money after bad. Or like those times you stay in a bad relationship or job you hate just because you've already invested so much time and energy into it.
Exactly. It's like we're so focused on avoiding that loss
Right.
that we fail to see the bigger picture.
Yeah. It's amazing how our brains can trick us like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes I wonder, couldn't that same fear of loss also be used to motivate us in a positive way?
You're absolutely right. We can actually leverage loss aversion to our advantage.
Okay.
For example, instead of thinking about saving for retirement as simply gaining money for the future, try framing it as avoiding the potential loss of financial security and freedom in your later years.
Okay.
That fear of missing out on a comfortable retirement, that can be a powerful motivator to save.
That's brilliant. So it's about reframing the narrative and tapping into that aversion to loss as a driving force. It's like hacking our own brains to achieve positive outcomes. But let's be honest, sometimes those losses are unavoidable, especially in the stock market. How do we deal with those situations where we've already lost money? That's where the sunk cost fallacy comes in, right?
Precisely. The sunk cost fallacy is this insidious trap where we continue investing in something simply because we've already invested heavily in the past, even when it's clearly not a good decision anymore.
Oh,
It's like finishing a terrible book just because you're already halfway through.
I totally do that. Or watching a movie that's awful because you paid for the ticket.
Right.
It's like I feel obligated to finish it even though I'm not enjoying it at all.
Exactly.
I guess it's because we've already put in the effort or the money and we don't want to feel like it was all for nothing.
Mm-hmm. But here's the crucial thing to remember. Past losses are gone. They're sunk. They shouldn't dictate your future decisions.
Right.
The key question to ask yourself is, if I were starting fresh today, knowing what I know now, would I still invest in this?
Okay.
If the answer is no, then it's time to cut your losses and move on, even if it feels painful.
That's such a powerful question. It's like taking a step back and evaluating the situation with fresh eyes. It's about making decisions based on what's best for our future selves, not dwelling on past mistakes.
You got it. It's about breaking free from the emotional baggage of those sunk costs and making rational choices that align with our goals.
Okay, that's 3 biases down. Anchoring loss aversion and the sunk cost fallacy. I'm already starting to feel like I have a better grasp on how my brain works, but we have more to uncover, right? What other biases are lurking in the shadows, waiting to sabotage our financial decisions?
Let's talk about confirmation bias.
This is the one where we only see what we want to see, right?
Mhm.
Like scrolling through social media and only paying attention to posts that support our existing beliefs.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias is this fascinating tendency to seek out and favor information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs while conveniently ignoring anything that contradicts our views.
So it's like we're creating our own echo chambers, surrounding ourselves with information that reinforces our existing biases. I can see how that would be dangerous, especially when it comes to investing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias can lead us to make risky investments based solely on hype and positive reviews, ignoring any potential red flags or warnings. Think about those get-rich-quick schemes that promise unrealistic returns. They thrive on confirmation bias, preying on people who are so eager to believe the promises that they ignore any evidence to the contrary.
So instead of evaluating information objectively, we're basically cherry-picking the data that supports our desires while conveniently dismissing anything that challenges our rosy outlook.
Right.
It's almost like our brains are trying to protect us from disappointment, but in reality, they're setting us up for a potentially bigger fall.
So how do we break free from this confirmation bias? How do we start seeing the full picture, warts and all?
One effective technique is to play devil's advocate with yourself.
Okay.
Before making any significant financial decision, force yourself to consider the strongest arguments against it, even if it makes you uncomfortable.
Okay.
Actually, it's especially important if it makes you uncomfortable because that's a sign that you might be clinging to confirmation bias.
So instead of just focusing on the potential upside, we need to actively seek out the potential downsides as well. Exactly. Ask yourself, what are the potential risks? What could go wrong? What are the arguments against this investment? And here's a crucial tip. Write these arguments down.
Okay.
This helps to solidify them in your mind and counteracts the tendency to dismiss opposing viewpoints.
Oh, that's interesting.
If you can't effectively counter the arguments against the decision, that's a major red flag. It might be time to reconsider.
That's a great point. It's like having a built-in fact checker for our brains, helping us avoid those costly impulse decisions based on wishful thinking. Okay, so we've covered 4 major biases: anchoring loss aversion, the sunk cost fallacy, and confirmation bias. Each one is so sneaky in its own way. I'm starting to see how vulnerable we are to these mental traps. Is there anything else we need to watch out for, or are we ready to move on to the next part of our deep dive?
There's one more bias we should discuss, and it's a big one, the present bias. This is our tendency to prioritize immediate gratification over long-term rewards, and it can have a huge impact on our financial well-being.
Oh, I know this one all too well. It's that treat yourself mentality. That instant gratification feels so good, but then the credit card bill arrives and the guilt sets in. I guess it's like our brains are wired to seek pleasure in the moment, even if it comes with a price tag later on.
Precisely. We're wired to prioritize the here and now, even if it means sacrificing our future goals.
Right.
Think about saving for retirement. It seems so far off, right? So we put it off, telling ourselves we'll start saving next month or next year. But then those months and years turn into decades, and suddenly retirement is knocking on our door, and we're woefully unprepared.
It's like we're constantly battling between our present self who wants that new gadget or that fancy vacation, and our future self who's going to have to deal with the financial consequences. And let's be honest, the present self usually wins. So how do we level the playing field? How do we give our future selves a fighting chance?
One of the most effective strategies is to make saving automatics. Set up regular contributions to your retirement account or a savings goal so the money is deducted from your paycheck before you even see it.
So it's like paying your future self first.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. It takes the decision-making and the temptation out of the equation.
Exactly. And here's another tip. Visualize your future self.
Oh.
Imagine yourself in retirement, enjoying the fruits of your savings. Maybe you're traveling the world, spending time with loved ones, pursuing hobbies you've always dreamed of. Make that future feel real and tangible.
Yeah.
This can help you connect with your long-term goals and increase your motivation to save.
It's like giving our future selves a voice, reminding us that they matter too. It's not just about depriving ourselves today. It's about investing in our future happiness and security.
Exactly. And remember, even small, consistent actions can have a significant impact over time. Don't underestimate the power of compound interest. The earlier you start saving, the more time your money has to grow.
It's like that saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
I love that. Okay, so we've unpacked 5 major cognitive biases: anchoring loss aversion, the sunk cost fallacy confirmation bias, and the present bias. It's mind-blowing to think about how these subtle mental processes can have such a profound impact on our financial decisions. It's like having a whole team of invisible financial advisors working behind the scenes, some offering good advice, others leading us astray.
I know. It's almost like our brains are playing tricks on us. But here's the thing that's really struck me during this deep dive. Awareness is key. Now that we know about these biases, we can start to recognize them in action and take steps to mitigate their influence.
Absolutely. Awareness is the first step to making more informed and rational decisions. Once you understand how these biases operate, you can start to question your assumptions, challenge your impulses, and make choices that truly align with your financial goals.
It's like we've been given a secret decoder ring to decipher the messages our brains are sending us. Now we can separate the signal from the noise and make choices that benefit us in the long run.
I love that analogy. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. Now let's shift gears and explore how these biases play out in real-world scenarios. Because while understanding the concepts is important, seeing them in action can really drive the point home.
Absolutely. Let's get specific. What are some common situations where these biases can really trip us up? I know a lot of our listeners struggle with car buying. It can be such a stressful and overwhelming process.
You're right. Car buying is a perfect example of a situation where these biases can run rampant. In fact, car dealerships often use sophisticated sales tactics that exploit our cognitive weaknesses. Let's break down a few examples, starting with anchoring. Remember, this is where our brains fixate on the first piece of information we encounter. Car dealerships know this all too well.
So they're using anchoring against us. How so?
Think about the sticker price, the MSRP. That initial price becomes the anchor, making any subsequent discount seem like a great deal, even if it's still above market value. They might throw in some extras or offer a low monthly payment to sweeten the deal, but that initial price is still influencing your perception of value.
I see. It's like they're setting the bar high so that anything lower seems like a win, even if it's not. It's amazing how subtle these tactics can be.
It's true. And here's where loss aversion kicks in. You've invested time and energy into negotiating. You've taken the car for a test drive. You might even be picturing yourself behind the wheel. The thought of walking away empty-handed after all that effort can trigger that fear of loss, making you more likely to accept a less than ideal offer.
It's like the dealership is playing a psychological game with us, and they know exactly how to pull our strings. So how do we resist those persuasive tactics? How do we avoid falling into these traps?
One of the most effective strategies is to do your research beforehand. Know the fair market value of the car you want. Check out online resources like Kelley Blue Book or Edmunds to get an idea of what others are paying for similar vehicles. This gives you a solid anchor point, one that's based on data, not the dealer's inflated sticker price.
That's a great tip. So before we even step foot in the dealership, we need to be armed with knowledge and a clear understanding of what's a reasonable price. It's like going into battle with the right armor and weapons.
Exactly. And here's another crucial tip. Don't be afraid to walk away. If you're not comfortable with the deal, if you feel pressured or if the numbers don't add up, walk away. There are plenty of other dealerships and cars out there. Don't let the fear of loss cloud your judgment.
That's easier said than done, though, isn't it? Especially when you've already invested so much time and energy into the process. It's like sunk cost fallacies whispering in your ear, telling you to just go for it.
You're absolutely right. The sunk cost fallacy can be a powerful force in car buying. We've already spent hours researching. We've taken time off work to visit the dealership. We might even have that deposit burning a hole in our pocket. But here's the thing, that time and energy are gone regardless of whether we buy the car or not. The key is to focus on the future, not the past. Ask yourself, if I were starting fresh today, would I still choose this car at this price? If the answer is no, then it's time to move on, even if it means starting the process over again.
That's a powerful reminder. It's about making decisions that align with our long-term goals, not letting past investments cloud our judgment. Okay, so we've seen how anchoring loss aversion and the sunk cost fallacy can play out in car buying. What about confirmation bias? Does that also factor into this equation?
Absolutely. Imagine you've fallen in love with a particular car. You've read glowing reviews online, you've heard rave reviews from friends, and you can already picture yourself cruising down the highway in style. This is where confirmation bias can kick in. You start seeking out information that confirms your existing beliefs, ignoring any potential red flags or negative reviews.
So we're basically filtering out any information that challenges our rosy perception of this dream car. It's like we're putting on those rose-colored glasses and refusing to acknowledge any flaws.
Exactly. And this can lead to costly mistakes. You might overlook important safety concerns, reliability issues, or hidden costs associated with owning that particular car. To avoid falling into this trap, remember the devil's advocate technique we discussed earlier. Force yourself to seek out and consider the negative reviews. What are the common complaints? What are the potential downsides of owning this car?
So instead of just focusing on the positive hype, we need to actively seek out the potential downsides. It's like getting a second opinion from a doctor before undergoing a major medical procedure. We want to make sure we're considering all the angles, not just blindly following our initial enthusiasm.
Exactly. It's about making informed choices, not just following our hearts, especially when it comes to major financial decisions, like buying a car.
Okay, we've covered car buying. What about investing? These biases must run wild in the stock market, right?
Oh, absolutely. The stock market is a prime example of how cognitive biases can lead to irrational decision-making. It's a high-stakes environment where emotions run high and our brains are constantly bombarded with information, both real and perceived. Let's start with anchoring. Remember, this bias makes us fixate on the first piece of information we encounter. In the context of investing, this could be the price at which we first bought a stock.
So we become attached to that initial price, even if the company's fundamentals have changed significantly.
Precisely. We might hold on to a stock that's plummeting in value, hoping it'll eventually return to that initial price, even if logic dictates it's time to cut our losses and move on. It's that classic buy high, sell low scenario that so many investors fall into.
It's like we're letting that initial price tag dictate our decisions instead of evaluating the current situation objectively. It's fascinating how those first impressions can be so powerful.
It's true. And this is where loss aversion also comes into play. The pain of admitting defeat and selling at a loss feels far worse than the potential of losing even more money. So we hold on hoping for a miracle, even when all signs point to further decline.
It's like we're paralyzed by the fear of realizing the loss. It's almost like we'd rather pretend it's not happening than face the reality of our bad decision.
Exactly. And this can lead to significant financial losses. One way to combat this is to set predefined rules for yourself. Determine beforehand at what point you'll sell a stock, regardless of its initial purchase price.
So it's like having a stop-loss order, but for our emotions. It's taking the decision-making out of our hands when we're most vulnerable to those feelings of loss and regret.
Precisely. This removes emotion from the equation and allows you to make decisions based on logic and your predetermined strategy. It's like having a financial autopilot that helps you avoid those impulsive, emotion-driven decisions.
That's a great analogy. Okay, we've talked about anchoring and loss aversion in investing. What about the sunk cost fallacy? How does that play out in the stock market?
Imagine you've invested heavily in a particular company, but it's consistently underperforming. You've poured your hard-earned money into this stock. You've followed the company's every move. You might even have a personal connection to the brand. But the numbers are telling a different story. The stock is tanking, and there's no sign of a turnaround.
But you're hesitant to sell because you've already invested so much. It's like that saying, throwing good money after bad.
Exactly. The sunk cost fallacy whispers in your ear, telling you to hold on, to double down, to justify those past investments. But remember, past investments should not dictate future decisions. The best decision is always the one that serves your best interests going forward, regardless of past losses.
It's about detaching ourselves from the emotional baggage of those sunk costs and making rational choices that align with our current financial goals. It's like acknowledging that we made a mistake, but not letting that mistake define our future actions.
You got it. And this is where confirmation bias can really wreak havoc in the investing world. We tend to seek out information that validates our existing beliefs about a particular stock or investment strategy.
So we're basically creating our own echo chambers, surrounding ourselves with news analysis that supports our decisions, even if those decisions are flawed.
Precisely. We might only read articles or follow analysts who are bullish on a stock we own, ignoring any negative news or warnings that might challenge our rosy outlook.
It's like we're selectively filtering the information we consume, creating a distorted reality that reinforces our existing biases. It's almost like we're afraid to admit we were wrong. So how do we break free from this confirmation bias? How do we start seeing the full picture, both the good and the bad?
The key is to actively seek out diverse perspectives. Don't just listen to the cheerleaders. Seek out dissenting opinions and critical analysis. Read articles from reputable sources that challenge your assumptions. Talk to financial advisors who have different perspectives. The more diverse your sources of information, the more well-rounded your understanding of the situation will be. This helps you make more informed and objective decisions, particularly when it comes to finances.
It's like getting a second opinion from a doctor before undergoing a major medical procedure. We want to make sure we're considering all the angles, not just the ones that support our existing beliefs.
Exactly. And this is especially important in investing where emotions can cloud our judgment. It's about making decisions based on logic data and a thorough understanding of the risks and potential rewards.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've covered so much ground, from the basic principles of cognitive biases to how they play out in real-world scenarios like car buying and investing. I'm starting to see these biases everywhere now. It's like a whole new lens through which to view the world.
That's the power of awareness. Once you start to understand these biases, you can't unsee them. And that's a good thing because it means you're becoming a more informed and savvy decision maker.
I completely agree. This deep dive has been an eye-opener for me, and I'm sure it has been for our listeners as well. But we're not done yet, right? We still have one more part of this deep dive to go. What can our listeners expect in the final installment of this episode? So we've spent this deep dive exploring how our brains can sometimes play tricks on us when it comes to money. We've uncovered these hidden biases that influence our decisions, often without us even realizing it. But knowledge is power, right? Now that we're aware of these biases, what can we do about it? How can we actually use this information to make smarter choices and avoid those costly financial pitfalls?
That's the million-dollar question. And the good news is there are practical strategies we can use to mitigate the influence of these biases. It's not about eliminating them entirely, as that's probably impossible, but rather about becoming more mindful of their presence and taking steps to counteract their effects.
So it's like we're learning to play a game of mental chess, anticipating our brain's moves and developing counter strategies to stay one step ahead.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
One of the most effective techniques we've already touched on is pre-commitment. This involves making decisions in advance when we're in a more rational and less emotionally charged state.
So like setting up automatic contributions to our retirement accounts so that the money is saved before we even have a chance to spend it. That's something I've been meaning to do for ages.
Exactly. By automating our savings, we remove the temptation to spend that money in the heat of the moment. It's like putting our future selves on autopilot. We can also use pre-commitment in other areas of our financial lives. For example, if we know we tend to overspend on impulse purchases, we can set a budget in advance and stick to it. Or we can make a rule that we won't buy anything over a certain amount without sleeping on it for 24 hours.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like creating a set of rules for ourselves that help us navigate those tempting situations when our emotions are running high. But sometimes those rules can feel a bit restrictive. Like, what if a truly amazing opportunity comes along and I need to act quickly?
That's a valid concern. And that's why it's important to find a balance between pre-commitment and flexibility. We don't want to miss out on genuine opportunities, but we also don't want to let our impulses lead us astray. One strategy is to build in some flexibility within our rules. For example, we could have a small fun money category in our budget that allows for spontaneous purchases. Or we could have a rule that we can break our pre-commitment once a month as long as we carefully consider the pros and cons.
I like that. It's about finding a system that works for us, one that provides structure and guidance without feeling too rigid or restrictive. But sometimes it feels like we're fighting an uphill battle against our own brains. Like, even when we know about these biases, they can still sneak up on us.
That's absolutely true. These biases are deeply ingrained in our cognitive processes. They're not easy to overcome. But remember, awareness is half the battle. The more we practice recognizing these biases in action, the better we become at catching them before they lead us astray.
So it's like developing a mental muscle, strengthening our ability to make rational decisions, even when our emotions are pulling us in a different direction. But, Sometimes those emotions can be pretty powerful. Like, what if we're dealing with a major financial decision, like buying a house or investing a large sum of money? Those are the times when our biases can really trip us up, right?
You're absolutely right. Those big decisions can be incredibly stressful, and that stress can amplify our cognitive biases. That's why it's so important to seek out objective advice and perspectives from trusted sources. Talk to a financial advisor, or real estate agent, or a trusted friend or family member who has experience in these areas.
That's a great point. It's like having a coach in our corner, someone who can help us see the bigger picture and make decisions that align with our long-term goals, not just our immediate emotions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to get a second opinion or even a third opinion. It's your money, and you deserve to make informed decisions. Another powerful strategy is to write down the pros and cons of each option. This forces us to slow down, think things through, and consider all the angles. It can also help us identify any potential biases that might be influencing our thinking.
That's a great tip. It's like taking a step back from the emotional whirlwind and looking at the situation with a more objective lens.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And remember, it's okay to take our time. There's no need to rush into big decisions. The more time we allow ourselves to process the information, weigh the options, and consider the potential consequences, the more likely we are to make choices that serve us well in the long run.
This has been such an enlightening deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of how my brain works, and I'm already starting to think about how I can apply these strategies to my own financial life.
That's fantastic to hear. And remember, this is just the beginning. The more you explore the world of behavioral finance and delve into the fascinating interplay between psychology and money, the more empowered you'll become to make choices that align with your goals and values.
So to wrap up this deep dive into cognitive biases, we've learned that our brains are wired with these mental shortcuts that can sometimes lead us astray, especially when it comes to money. But by becoming aware of these biases, developing strategies to counteract their effects, and seeking out objective advice, we can make more informed and rational decisions that set us up for financial success. Remember, it's a journey, not a destination. And with each step we take, we become more savvy and more in control of our financial destinies.
Beautifully said. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about your own cognitive biases, the better equipped you'll be to make sound financial decisions and achieve your goals. So keep learning, keep questioning, and keep those bias detectors on high alert.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and gained some valuable insights along the way. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay financially savvy.